And good morning. Welcome back to our weekly professional insights, where we talk to licensed professionals about real issues that you're dealing with so we can show you how a coordinated financial team can help create clarity in your financial plans. However, this morning we're going a little outside the financial realm because this morning we're going to go over the art of asking for introductions, something that we work with professionals all the time and they just can't grasp this concept. So luckily, we have Hamish Knox with us this morning, a member of Global Sandler Network. He helps companies create and maintain scalable, repeatable, consistent strategies and processes. It's a very long list of what he does, very robust, very knowledgeable. So we're going to get into this. But before we do, his links below, hit the subscribe button, notification, all those good subscribe things. So Hamish, with that said, good morning, sir, man. Good to see you.
Good morning. Great to see you too, Mike.
Hey, so I really appreciate you being here this morning. So one of the premises that you and I spoke about is one of the articles, because you've written very many of them. You've been on stage, you've talked about a lot of these aspects. Mm-hmm. But in terms of introductions, what are some of the common fears and anxieties that you see professionals when they ask for introductions?
So the key point, though, is they have to ask. So I think the first one is that they're actually not asking. So I hear this regularly. You know, I'll be prospecting the managing partner of a law firm, an accounting firm, whatever, and they'll say, "Don't need that." Okay, fair enough. Not everyone does. Why? Everything comes through referrals, which is code for we sit around and hope that one of our clients happens to be having a conversation with someone in their network. And that person happens to say, "Hey, I'm really struggling with fill in the blank." And our client happens to go, "Oh, I work with a really cool organization who actually helped me with that. Let me connect you." Now, I like pennies from heaven. It's not a sustainable way to create a revenue engine.
Yep. And so one of the things that I post on a regular basis, especially with CPAs and attorneys, because that's who we deal with, is this idea that you don't need to pay these absurd amount for marketing. You just need to create more value for your clients. But in that, one of the things that really stuck out to me in your article was that you have to tee up the conversation and be able to share that value. So what are some of the tips and techniques a professional can do that?
So the first key thing is we have to be other focused instead of self-centered. So Ralph Waldo Emerson said, if you want more, give more. So trusted advisors give introductions. So that's number one. So we want to give first, because then law of reciprocity says that our clients are much more likely to give back to us. But if we're just going out going, "Hey, Mike, who in your network would you like to introduce me to?" You're going to be like, "I don't know." Because we've all been burned, by the way, right? All of us have been burned by that well-meaning family member who got into, MLM or something like that. And they're like, can you refer me to people in your network? And they're like, ugh, once bitten, twice shy. So first thing we need to go, and by the way, this is the key thing, is the professionals will say, "Well, I don't know who I could introduce my clients to." Awesome. Ask them. Ask them what they're struggling with. And I've had a client before who was the president of a safety software company. And they said, "Well, I can't make introductions to my clients." I said, "Well, tell me why." And they said, "Because I don't know who could be a client for them." And I said, "Hey, that's totally cool. Who is your primary contact at your organization? Like, what's the title on their business card?" And they said, "CEO or owner." I said, "Great. Here's what I know about CEOs." Because, by the way, I am one. They need insurance. They need copiers. They need IT. They need other things like that. Might you have people in your network who you might be able to introduce? And my client went, "Oh, I get it now. It's not about directly putting money in my pocket. It's about supporting my client." And I said, yes, because when our client thinks Mike is the guy that I go to when I'm struggling with anything in my business, that's why we keep our clients long-term, is because they look at us as a trusted advisor and not just an accountant or a lawyer or fill in the blank professional service.
So let's dig into that reciprocity side, because, and I talk to professionals about this all the time. Most professionals, especially when they're referring back and forth, right? This is different than a client. But most professionals referring back and forth, they have this mental scorecard in their head. I give you one, you give me one. And if you don't give me more than I give you, I'm taking my ball and I'm going home. Right. But when you talk about the law of reciprocity in terms of building the value for your clients, explain that a little bit, because if I'm providing a service, isn't that the reciprocity?
So technically, yes, right? So like our client, but that's also what our client is paying us for, right? So my clients are paying me to support them in sustainably scaling their sales and their revenues, and at all touch points of their organization. So and yes, I have clients come back and say, "Oh my, you have doubled, tripled, octupled my sales. Thank you so much." That's table stakes to them, right? So I can certainly say. And by the way, this is another trap that we can coach our professionals on. So professionals listening, anytime a client says a nice thing about your service, whatever that is, right? Oh, I'm so happy with how quickly you turned around my fill in the blank. You know what? Thank you for sharing that with us. It's something that we really pride ourselves on. Out of curiosity, who have you spoken with recently who might appreciate a faster turnaround on those documents than they might be getting right now? Very gentle, very easy. It goes into the flow of conversation. Too many professionals get caught up in the formality of asking for introductions, and they're probably messing it up because they're asking for a referral instead of an introduction. It shouldn't be formal. It should be like you and I went out for a cup of coffee or another beverage, and we're just chatting, and all of a sudden, like, I just had a thought. Hey, Mike, who have you spoken with recently who might? And then I ask you. And the answer might be no, but I can't be attached to the outcome of you giving me a name. I have to be attached to the process of asking. Because if I'm attached to the process of asking, eventually I will get something back. But if I'm just sitting there and you can read my body language where I'm like, I want a name, I want a name, I want a name, you're going to be less likely because you're anxious because you're like, why is Hamish so emotional about this?
Yep. And so how important, Hamish, one, how important is it to have the depth of relationship, right? Because if you just do one thing for a client and then you go ahead and you ask for, hey, give me 5 names, right? So how important is it, one, to tee up that conversation as what the value you're going to produce and then build the depth of relationship?
So what we believe is you can actually ask for an introduction at any point, at any touch point with a buyer, even if they say no on a prospecting call. In fact, I have a good friend of mine in the Sandler Network. His very first client ever came from a buyer who not only did a prospecting call with him, went through an entire 2-hour discovery meeting, and at the end of it said, you know what? I totally get what you're doing. I totally see how it could be valuable. It is not for me. And so think about this, listeners. That is pretty emotional because you've spent, a couple hours at least with this buyer, and the buyer has just basically said your baby's ugly.
Yeah.
And my colleagues stayed present and said, you know what? We are not a good fit for everybody. I'm glad you told me that. I'm curious, who are a couple of business owners in your network who might be open-minded like you and at least spend a phone call with me? And that buyer who said no gave my colleague a name, and that name turned into my colleague's first client. And I believe they're still working together like 15 years later.
So Hamish, that's a pretty big paradigm, because I've talked to so many professionals and the first thing out of their mouth when I start talking about referrals and teeing this conversation up, their response is, I need to get the business before I introduce anybody else. No. So what you talked about is a massive paradigm shift. How do you get a professional into that paradigm that says, you know what, it's not just about me. How can I serve you?
That's exactly it. So number one, it's never about us. It's always about the other person, right? Whether I'm talking to my spouse or partner or my child, whether I'm talking to a strategic partner, like you talked about, professionals referring to other professionals, right? Strategic alliances, or whether I'm directly talking to a team member or a client. It's always about them, not self-centered. And so we have to get the professional in the mindset of, I'm there to support whoever I'm speaking with. The other thing is this, forgive me, nonsense about relationships.
Yep.
This, as a good friend of mine, Carlos, says, the sale does not come from the relationship. The relationship comes from the sale. And Harvard did a study years ago that demonstrated that selling on relationships is the single lowest percentage way to be successful in sales. However, rapport beats relationships every time. And the root of the word rapport is the word trust. Now, where professionals have an advantage over traditional salespeople is professionals are naturally trusted. If I'm going to go visit with a lawyer, there is naturally a bit of trust. I just had my will updated. And going in, I already had a level of trust with that lawyer. And so for professionals listening, when someone says, I'm going to work with you, whether it's the first project or the 50th project, what they're saying in code words is, I trust you. And so when they say, I'd like to work with you, we then have the permission to say, Mike, I appreciate that. I am looking forward to exceeding your expectations. One of the things that we really value from our clients is that they introduce us to people in their network who would appreciate a similar level of service that we're going to deliver to you. When we reconnect next, would you be okay if we had a conversation about who in your network might want to have a conversation with me, whether they choose to work with us like you did or not?
And so, Hamish, I love this, because you're literally saying that can happen in that first conversation that you don't even know the client.
Amen. And here's the other thing that I'm doing. Human beings are really great with the past, right? Because everything was better in the past. They're okay with the present and they suck at the future. So when I frame it in the way of like, I didn't ask you, give me 3 names now. I said, next time we get together, would you be open to a conversation about? So now present Mike looks ahead at future Mike and goes, oh, that guy's got to deal with it. So now fast forward 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. Now we're here. Hey, Mike, great to see you again. You know, we've got the draft documents to show you. Hey, Mike, by the way, last time we spoke, we agreed that we would have a conversation about who we might be able to introduce each other to, me to you and you to me. Are you still comfortable having that conversation today? And now, because of reciprocity and social norms, present Mike looks back at past Mike and goes, well, I guess I better keep that commitment that I made back here. And so now we're much more likely to have a positive conversation as opposed to springing an introduction ask on our buyer, which is likely to damage the rapport that we have.
So taking that conversation one step farther, Hamish, in the sense that identifying your ideal client, right? If you have, as an example, across the industry, one of the broken parts about financial services is that financial advisors don't want to work with individuals with $100,000. As unfortunate that is, it's the reality.
Right.
So in that scenario, how do you have that conversation and then transition it to, by the way, this is my ideal client, without saying, this is my ideal client?
So we're allowed to do that, right? We're allowed to frame the ask that we have. We have that right, because the only valuable all humans have is time. And as a professional, especially if I'm still doing most of the origination or rainmaking in the business, bringing in the clients, I don't want to be speaking with individuals who, you know, are, forgive me, going to waste my time because they literally just can't afford my services or they're not right. So what is likely to happen is when I say that, my client is probably going to say, well, what's a good introduction look like for you? Or, well, who do you want to speak with? Because they're also racking their brains. They're like, I mean, I don't know. I could talk to these 3 people, but I don't know if they're a good fit for Hamish. Yeah. So when a client says, who is an ideal introduction? Where most individuals, professionals, sellers, doesn't matter, go to, they fall into the anybody trap.
Yep.
Well, anybody who? Well, the fact of the matter is, I don't know anybody's. I know CEOs, I know directors of sales, I know VPs of operations. So the more clarity that we can give without getting like way too narrow, the better it is. And we want to ask for information. Like, I'm not going to say, well, Mike, I'm looking to talk to entrepreneurs who are doing between $5 and $10 million annually. Because I don't know about you, but I'm not going out and having a beer with my buddies going, so how much revenue did you make last year?
Right.
Right. Yeah. So it's got to be things that people will talk about in normal everyday conversation over a coffee, over lunch, at the sidelines of the sporting event or at the band practice or whatever it might be. So I want to get really, really as narrow as I can be without being restrictive or without at giving information that no one in their right mind is ever going to ask a friend of theirs.
Absolutely. So Hamish, and I want to be cognizant of your time here. As we wrap up, what is some advice that you would give a professional who is starting to get into this frame of mind?
Mm-hmm. So trap yourself. And I say trap respectfully because our brains are wired to keep us safe, which usually means stuck. So if we don't trap ourselves, we're never going to change our behavior. And this is a behavior change. It's what we're doing. It's one of the hardest things humans can do. So set a goal for yourself. Number one, how many introductions are you going to give every month? Every month, track it weekly, right? So if it's 8, just to pick a really simple number, right? That's 2 a week in my, my simple math. So how many are you going to give? And then a number of how many you are going to ask for that is equal to or less than the number that you're going to give, right? Because if you want to get more, you give more.
Okay. Share
that number with someone who you are comfortable holding you accountable to that number. So on every couple of weeks, are you okay with your office manager? Are you okay with, someone in a professional network? Don't make it your spouse or partner. By the way, just from experience, spouses and partners, it gets a little wiggly, but someone in your professional network who you are comfortable asking you, hey, Hamish, how you doing on giving introductions this week or this month, right?
Mm-hmm.
Track that for 60 days. So this is 2 months of activity, and then sit back and analyze the numbers. So set a target, just pick a number. I mean, better than 0, right? Pick 1. You're going to do 1 a month, and you're going to ask for 1 a month. Now, I would encourage you also to track how many you get, but don't set a target because we can't control how many we get. So we can control how many we give. We can control how many we ask for. We also want to find out how many are we actually getting. Because ultimately, if the ratio of asks to receives is off, maybe we need to adjust our technique. But we'll do that once we have some data, as opposed to going, my tummy thinks that I'm not doing very well, because our tummy is not a very good way of running our business.
Well, and I appreciate that, Hamish, because one of the things that I've heard from a friend, or I'm sure he's in of him, Jason Miller, he's on LinkedIn a lot. One of the things that he always talks about is what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed gets improved.
Amen, brother.
And so if we don't know, and we talk about this all the time, if we don't know our numbers, how do we know, one, where we're going, how close we are to get there, or as what is a Cat in the Hat, or whatever, Alice in Wonderland, hey, how do I get there? Well, where are you going? I don't know. Well, then I can't help you, right?
Yeah.
So
we'll get you there.
Absolutely. So Hamish, thank you so much. I love that last bit of it. I'm going to push a lot of our professionals to start tracking these things and, making sure that we can assist them in doing that. Mike has put together a lot of tools, and the team's put together a lot of tools. But ultimately, please, if you have any questions, Hamish's contact information is below in the description. Hit that notification bell, submit any questions. I'll get them to Hamish. Hamish, thank you so much for the time. I know you're very busy, so I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.